Imagine standing on a game show stage next to the man you have loved for over 20 years, the man you raised children with, the man you gave your best years to, and hearing him say in front of a live studio audience that you are too old for him. That is exactly what happened to Gloria Parsons on Family Feud. And when Steve Harvey heard those words come out of her husband's mouth, the look on his face told the entire audience that something was about to happen. What Steve did next was not in any script. It was not planned by any producer. It was one man standing up for a woman who had just been disrespected on national television by the one person who should have been protecting her, and it became one of the most talked about moments in the history of the show. Before we get into this story, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel right now. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a single video. Trust us, you are not going to want to miss how this one ends. Now let us get into it. There was a time when growing old with someone was considered a blessing, when gray hair and laugh lines were proof that two people had built something that lasted. But somewhere along the way, some people forgot that the person standing next to them through decades of hard work, sacrifice, and love is not a car that loses value with every passing year. They are a partner whose worth only increases with time. What happened on that Family Feud stage reminded every single person watching that disrespecting the woman who stood by you is not just wrong, it is a mistake that can cost you everything. J. Richard Parsons was 53 years old. He was the kind of man who spent a lot of time thinking about how he looked. He wore fitted shirts that he clearly bought a size too small to show off arms he had been working on at the gym for the past 2 years. His hair was freshly cut and dyed a shade of dark brown that did not quite match his age. He had a new gold chain around his neck and shoes that looked like they had never touched a sidewalk. Everything about Richard's appearance said the same thing. I am trying very hard to look like I am not 53 years old. To anyone paying attention, it was obvious. Richard Parsons was going through something, the kind of midlife reinvention that starts at the gym and ends in places that destroy families. Standing next to him on the Family Feud stage was his wife, Gloria, 51 years old. Gloria was a beautiful woman in every sense of the word. She had warm brown skin, high cheekbones, and the kind of quiet elegance that does not need a spotlight to be noticed. She wore a simple emerald green blouse and gold earrings that her mother had given her on her wedding day. Her hair was natural, silver streaks woven through dark curls, and she wore it proudly, the way a woman does when she has made peace with who she is, and does not need anyone's approval. Gloria had spent the last 24 years as a registered nurse at Mercy General Hospital in Baltimore, Maryland. She worked the overnight shift in the intensive care unit, the brutal 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. stretch that most nurses burned out of within a few years. Gloria had done it for over 2 decades. She had held the hands of dying patients at 3 in the morning when their families could not be there. She had performed CPR until her arms ached. She had delivered news that broke people's hearts, and she had comforted strangers through the worst moments of their lives. Then she would drive home at dawn, make breakfast for her 2 sons, pack their lunches, and get them out the door to school before collapsing into bed for a few hours of sleep. She did this 5 nights a week for 24 years. The Parsons had 2 sons. Their oldest, Terrence, was 22 and had just graduated from Morgan State University with a degree in business administration. Their younger son, Dante, was 18 and starting college in the fall on a partial basketball scholarship. Both boys were polite, well-spoken, and clearly shaped by their mother's discipline and warmth. They stood on stage flanking Gloria with a protectiveness that was noticeable even to the casual viewer. They stayed close to her, and when they looked at their father, there was something guarded in their expressions, the kind of careful distance that develops when trust in a parent has been quietly eroding for a while. The marriage had been strained for the past 3 years, though Gloria had done her best to keep that fact private. Richard had started spending more time at the gym, more money on clothes, and more evenings out with friends that Gloria had never met. He had become critical of her appearance in small, poisonous ways. Comments about her weight, her hair, her clothes. Suggestions that she should try to look more like the women he followed on social media. He never said anything cruel enough to quote back to him as evidence of something terrible. He said things that were just sharp enough to cut but quiet enough to deny. Death by 1,000 small remarks. And Gloria, being the woman she was, absorbed every single one of them and said nothing. The Family Feud appearance had been arranged by Terrence, who thought his family could use something fun and positive to bring them together. He had no way of knowing that the stage he was bringing them to would become the place where everything his father had been thinking in private would finally come out in public. The taping started with the usual energy that Family Feud was known for. The Parsons family, wearing matching white shirts, faced off against the Delgado family from Phoenix, Arizona. Steve Harvey came out to his standard thunderous applause, shaking hands and making jokes. He noticed Richard's outfit immediately and gave him a playful once-over. "My man, you came dressed like you are going to a nightclub after this," Steve said, getting a big laugh from the audience. Richard grinned and flexed slightly, clearly enjoying the attention. Gloria smiled politely beside him, but there was no warmth in it. Her sons exchanged a glance that the cameras caught, but nobody in the audience understood yet. The first 2 rounds were uneventful. The Parsons played well enough, trading rounds with the Delgados. Richard was loud and confident at the podium, treating every correct answer like a personal victory and every wrong answer like someone else's fault. Gloria was steady and smart, giving solid answers and quietly correcting strategy. When the family huddled, Steve seemed to gravitate toward Gloria's calm energy, asking her follow-up questions and complimenting her composure. "You are the steady hand in this family, aren't you?" Steve said to her at one point. Gloria just smiled and said, "Somebody has to be." The moment that changed everything came in the 3rd round. Steve read the question with his characteristic dramatic pause. "Name something that gets better with age." The audience murmured with anticipation. It was a warm, positive question, the kind that usually produced feel-good answers. Wine, cheese, friendship, wisdom. The Delgado family had the board and put up 3 answers before they struck out. Now it was the Parsons family's chance to steal. Steve looked at the Parsons lineup. "All right, Parsons family, you need 1 answer to steal the board. Huddle up." The family leaned in. Terrence whispered, "Say wine." "That is definitely up there." Dante nodded. Gloria said quietly, "Love. I think love gets better with age." It was a beautiful answer, the kind that should have made her husband squeeze her hand and nod in agreement. But Richard did not do that. Instead, he scoffed, not a small, private scoff, a loud, dismissive sound that the microphones picked up clearly and the cameras captured from 2 different angles. "Love," Richard said, shaking his head. "Nah, that is not up there. Let me handle this one." He stepped to the podium with exaggerated confidence and looked at Steve. "I am going to say wine, Steve." Steve nodded. "Wine. Good answer. Let us see." The board buzzed. Wine was already up there, already guessed by the Delgados. The steal failed. The Parsons lost the round. Richard threw his hands up in frustration and turned back to the family. "Should have gone with my first instinct," he muttered, as though the loss was everyone's fault but his own. Steve watched this entire exchange with the focused attention of a man who had spent decades reading people. He saw the scoff. He saw Gloria's face fall when her husband dismissed her answer. He saw the way Terrence put his hand on his mother's shoulder. And he saw something else too, something that would come out into the open very soon. He saw a marriage in trouble. He had seen it before, hundreds of times, on this very stage. The body language, the small cruelties, the way one partner diminished the other without even realizing or caring that they were doing it. During the break between rounds, Steve wandered over to the Parsons family to chat, as he often did. He started light, asking the boys about school and sports. Then he turned to Richard and Gloria. 23 years married, Steve said, reading from his card. "That is a real accomplishment. You two must have quite a story." Richard jumped in before Gloria could speak. "Yeah, we got married young. High school sweethearts, you know how it goes. She was the prettiest girl in school back then." He said it casually, but the words, "back then," landed in the room like a rock through a window. Gloria flinched. Terrence's jaw tightened. Even Steve's expression shifted, just barely, from friendly to alert. "Back then," Steve repeated slowly, his eyebrows lifting slightly. What about now? Richard laughed, the kind of laugh people use when they are about to say something terrible and want to pretend it is a joke. Come on, Steve. We are all getting older. You know how it is. I keep telling Gloria she should come to the gym with me, keep up a little, you know. A man has needs. I am in the best shape of my life right now, and I need my wife to match my energy. He said this while flexing his arm again, mugging for the camera, completely unaware that the temperature in the studio had just dropped 20 degrees. Steve did not laugh. The audience did not laugh. A few people in the front row shook their heads in open disbelief. Gloria stood absolutely still, her face perfectly composed, but her eyes told a different story. They were the eyes of a woman who had heard some version of this speech many times before, always in private, and who was now hearing it broadcast on national television for the first time. Steve took a slow breath. Then he asked the question that detonated everything. Richard, let me make sure I am understanding you. Are you saying your wife is not good enough for you the way she is? Richard seemed to realize, too late, that he was standing on dangerous ground. He tried to backpedal. Nah, I am not saying that, Steve. I love my wife. I am just saying, you know, we are at that age where you have to work at it. She has let herself go a little bit, and I am just trying to motivate her. I am in my prime right now. I just want her to keep up. He looked at the audience for support and found none. Not a single person was nodding. Not a single person was smiling. Gloria finally spoke. Her voice was calm, controlled, and devastatingly clear. Hay has been saying things like this for 3 years, Steve. That I am too old. That I do not look the way I used to. That he deserves someone who matches his energy, whatever that means. I work 12-hour overnight shifts saving people's lives. I raised 2 boys who are good men. I have been faithful and loyal and present for 23 years. And this is what I get. A man who dyes his hair and buys tight shirts and tells me I am not enough anymore because I have the nerve to look like a 51-year-old woman who has lived a real life. The audience erupted into applause so loud that the production team had to signal for quiet. Gloria had not raised her voice. She had not cried. She had not shouted. She had simply told the truth with a dignity that made every person in that studio understand exactly who the real adult in this marriage was. Terence and Dante stood behind their mother like sentinels, their faces a mixture of pride and barely contained fury. And Steve Harvey stood at center stage with an expression that the internet would later describe as the look of a man who was about to deliver a sermon. Steve let the applause die down naturally. He did not rush it. He let Gloria's words settle into every corner of that studio. Then he turned to Richard, and when he spoke, his voice carried the kind of quiet authority that only comes from a man who has earned the right to say hard things because he has lived through hard things himself. Richard, I need you to listen to me. And I mean really listen. Not the way you listen when your wife is talking, and you are already thinking about what you are going to say next. I mean listen the way you listen when someone is about to tell you something that could save your life, because that is what this is. Richard's smile was gone. His arms were at his sides. The gym confidence and the flexing and the peacocking had evaporated completely. He looked like a man standing in a courtroom waiting for a verdict. Steve continued. You just stood on this stage, on national television, in front of your wife and your children, and told the world that the woman who has given you 23 years of her life is not keeping up with you. That she has let herself go. That she is too old for the new version of you. Do you understand what you just did? You did not just insult your wife. You insulted every single year she gave you. Every night she worked a 12-hour shift and came home to take care of your sons. Every sacrifice she made. Every time she chose your family over herself. You looked at all of that and said it was not enough because she does not look like she is 25 anymore. Steve paused and shook his head slowly. Let me tell you something about what gets better with age, since that was the question. You know what gets better with age? A woman who has stayed loyal to you for 23 years. A woman who raised your children to be good men while you were sleeping. A woman who held your family together with 2 hands and never asked for applause. That woman right there, Steve pointed at Gloria, is the best thing that ever happened to you, and the fact that you cannot see that tells me that the person who has let themselves go in this marriage is not Gloria. It is you." The audience exploded. People were on their feet. Women were clapping and shouting. Men were nodding. The response was so overwhelming that Steve had to wait a full 30 seconds before he could speak again. When the noise finally settled, Steve was not done. He was nowhere close to done. "Richard, I have been where you are. I have been the man in the gym looking in the mirror thinking he has figured something out. I have been the man who confused looking good with being good. And I am telling you from hard personal experience that the road you are on leads to one place. It leads to being alone. It leads to waking up in a nice apartment with your tight shirts and your gold chain, and nobody to share a meal with, nobody who knows your story, nobody who cared about you before you had anything and stayed with you while you built it. You are trading gold for tinfoil, brother, and you do not even see it." Steve walked closer to Richard and lowered his voice, though the microphone still caught every word. "Your wife is not too old for you. She is too good for the version of you that you have become, and you need to decide right now whether you want to be the man she married or the man who loses her. Because I promise you, Richard, a woman like Gloria does not stay forever. If you keep telling her she is not enough, one day she is going to believe you, and on that day you are going to lose the only person in this world who loved you for who you actually are, not who you pretend to be at the gym." Richard stood completely still. The bravado was gone. The performance was over. For the first time all day, possibly for the first time in years, there was nothing between Richard Parsons and the truth. His eyes were red. His chin was trembling. The man who had walked onto that stage flexing and grinning was now standing there with the raw, exposed expression of someone who had just been shown a mirror and did not recognize the person staring back. Steve turned to Gloria. His entire demeanor softened. "Gloria, I want to say something to you, and I want you to take it with you when you leave this stage today. You are beautiful. Not beautiful for 51. Not beautiful for a mother of 2. Not beautiful considering what you have been through. Beautiful, period. The gray in your hair is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is proof that you have lived, that you have worked, that you have earned every single one of those years. And any man who cannot see that is not looking at you. He is looking at his own insecurity and blaming you for it." Gloria's composure, the steady calm that she had maintained through every insult and every dismissal for 3 years, finally broke. Tears slid down her cheeks, but she did not look away. She stood there and let them fall because for the first time in longer than she could remember, someone was telling her that she was enough exactly as she was. The audience began a standing ovation that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than entertainment. It came from recognition. Every woman in that room who had ever been made to feel like time was her enemy saw herself in Gloria, and every person who understood what real beauty looked like was on their feet honoring it. Richard moved slowly toward his wife. He did not swagger. He did not perform. He walked like a man carrying something heavy. He stopped in front of Gloria and his voice, when it finally came, was wrecked. "I am sorry," he said. "I am sorry, Gloria. You are right. Steve is right. I got lost somewhere. I got so caught up in trying to feel young again that I forgot who was standing right next to me the whole time. You are not too old for me. You are the best part of my life. And I have been treating you like you do not matter. I am so sorry." Gloria looked at him for a long time. She did not rush to hug him. She did not immediately say she forgave him. She stood there and looked at the man she had married 23 years ago and the man he had become, and she made a decision that was hers alone to make. Then she reached out and took his hand. Not a hug, not an embrace. Just his hand. It was not absolution. It was a door left open. And the audience understood the difference. They applauded not with the explosive energy of a dramatic reconciliation, but with the quiet respect of people watching a woman set the terms on which she was willing to move forward. Steve nodded slowly. "That," he said, "is what grace looks like. She did not owe you that, Richard. Remember that. She chose to give it, and now it is your job to earn it, every single day, for the rest of your life." The game continued, and the Parsons family managed to pull together enough to make it to fast money. Gloria and Terrence played the final round. Gloria was calm and sharp, answering each question with the unshakable focus of a woman who spent her professional life making critical decisions under pressure. Terrence matched her energy with quick, smart answers. Together they scored 212 points. The 20,000 was theirs. But the real victory that day had nothing to do with the money. Before the cameras wrapped, Steve pulled Richard aside one more time. The audience watched as Steve spoke to him quietly, one hand on his shoulder, the conversation too low for the microphones to capture. Richard nodded repeatedly, wiping his eyes. Whatever Steve said in that private moment, it landed. When Richard walked back to his family, he looked different. Not defeated. Redirected. Like a man who had been walking confidently in the wrong direction and had just been turned around. When the episode aired 5 weeks later, the clip of Steve calling out Richard spread across every corner of the internet within hours. It was viewed over 25 million times in the first week alone. The comments section became one of the largest and most passionate discussions the show's social media pages had ever seen. Women wrote in by the tens of thousands, sharing their own stories of husbands and partners who had made them feel like aging was something to apologize for. They called Gloria a queen, an icon, and a representation of every woman who had ever been made to feel less than, because time had dared to pass. Men wrote in too, and many of them were brutally honest. Hundreds of comments said some version of the same admission. I have said things like that to my wife. Watching Steve call Richard out made me realize how wrong I was. The clip was picked up by national news outlets and discussed on talk shows and podcasts for weeks. Relationship therapists and psychologists used it as a case study in how the fear of aging could poison a marriage. Columnists wrote about what they called the Richard Parsons problem, the phenomenon of men who project their own midlife insecurities onto their partners instead of doing the internal work of accepting that time moves forward for everyone. Gloria became an unexpected symbol of grace under fire, a woman who did not need to shout or retaliate to make her point, because her dignity said everything. Behind the cameras, the real work began. Richard and Gloria started couples therapy the week after the taping. Gloria made it a condition, not a suggestion. She told Richard that she loved him and that she was willing to try, but only if he was willing to do the hard work of figuring out why he had spent 3 years tearing down the woman who had spent 23 years building him up. Richard agreed. He later admitted in a local radio interview that the first few therapy sessions were the hardest conversations of his life, harder than anything Steve had said to him on stage, because in therapy there was no audience and no cameras. There was just the truth, sitting in the room like an uninvited guest that refused to leave. The therapist helped Richard understand that his obsession with his physical appearance and his criticism of Gloria were symptoms of his own deep fear of getting older. He was not actually dissatisfied with his wife. He was terrified of his own mortality, and rather than confront that fear honestly, he had externalized it by projecting it onto the person closest to him. Every comment about Gloria's weight, her hair, her age was really a statement about his own anxiety. The therapist called it displacement. Richard called it the dumbest mistake he had ever made. 6 months after the episode aired, Steve Harvey invited the Parsons family back for a follow-up segment. The transformation was visible the moment they walked on stage. Richard was still in good shape, but the tight shirts and the gold chain were gone. He was dressed simply, comfortably, like a man who had stopped performing for strangers and started dressing for his own life. Gloria walked beside him, and this time, for the first time in years, she was smiling without effort. Not the polite, diplomatic smile she had worn on their first appearance. A real smile, the kind that reaches the eyes and softens the entire face. Steve asked how they were doing. Gloria answered first. "We are doing the work," she said. "It has not been easy. Some weeks are harder than others. But we are both showing up, and that is more than I could say a year ago." Richard spoke next, and the audience listened carefully, measuring his words against the man they remembered from 6 months earlier. "I stood on this stage and embarrassed my wife in front of the whole country. I said things that I can never take back. But Steve told me something that day that I think about every single morning. He said Gloria was too good for the version of me I had become. He was right. So I have spent the last 6 months becoming a version of myself that deserves her. I am not there yet, but I am closer than I was." Steve smiled, a warm, genuine smile that carried the pride of a man who had watched someone take his advice and actually use it. "Richard, the man standing in front of me today is not the same man who was flexing for the cameras 6 months ago, and that right there is proof that people can change when they are willing to be honest with themselves. I respect that, brother. I respect that deeply." The follow-up segment also featured a surprise that caught everyone off guard. Terrence, the Parsons' older son, had written a letter to Steve Harvey thanking him for what he had done that day. The letter was read on camera, and in it, Terrence explained that watching Steve defend his mother had fundamentally shaped his understanding of how a man should treat a woman. "I grew up watching my father slowly diminish my mother," Terrence wrote, "and I thought that was just how marriage worked. That day on your show you showed me that a real man does not tear down the woman beside him. A real man makes sure she knows that she is the most important person in his world. I carry that lesson with me every day, and I will carry it into my own marriage someday." Steve was visibly moved by the letter. He looked at Gloria and said, "You raised that young man. You, and no amount of gray hair or laugh lines or anything else will ever diminish what that means. That is your legacy, Gloria. Not what you look like, what you built." The Parsons story continued to resonate long after the follow-up segment faded from trending topics. Gloria was invited to speak at nursing conferences about the invisible emotional labor that women in caregiving professions carry, both at work and at home. She spoke plainly and without self-pity, telling audiences that she had spent decades caring for everyone except herself, and that it took a game show host calling out her husband on national television for her to realize she deserved to be cared for too. Her talks became widely shared online, and she was featured in a local Baltimore magazine under the headline, "The Woman Who Refused to Shrink." Richard became a cautionary tale in the best possible sense. He spoke openly at his church men's group about what he called his 3 years of foolishness and the wake-up call that Steve Harvey delivered on national television. He did not sugarcoat what he had done. He told the men in the room that he had been slowly destroying the best relationship in his life because he was afraid of getting older and did not have the courage to admit it. "Your wife is not your mirror," he would say. "She is not there to make you feel young. She is there to build a life with, and if you are tearing her down to avoid looking at yourself, you are going to end up alone." I almost did. On their 24th wedding anniversary, 1 year after the episode that changed everything, Richard took Gloria to dinner at the restaurant where they had their first date as teenagers in Baltimore. He gave her a handwritten letter that she later shared on social media with his permission. In it, he wrote, "For 23 years, you gave me the best version of yourself. For 3 of those years, I gave you my worst. I am spending the rest of my life making sure you only see the man you deserve. Not the one who flexed at the gym. Not the one who chased youth like it was something he could catch. The one who wakes up every morning grateful that the most beautiful woman he has ever known still chooses to be next to him." The post was shared over 200,000 times. Thousands of couples tagged their partners. Hundreds of men admitted in the comments that the letter had inspired them to say something to their own wives that they had been too proud or too oblivious to say before. The ripple effect of one moment on a game show stage continued to spread outward, touching marriages and relationships that Richard and Gloria Parsons would never even know about. Steve Harvey spoke about the Parsons family in a later interview and called it one of the moments he was most proud of in his career. "I have told a lot of jokes on that stage," Steve said, "but the most important thing I have ever done on Family Feud was look a man in the eye and tell him that the woman standing next to him was not too old. She was too good. And watching him finally understand that was worth more than any ratings number or viral clip. If this story moved you, take a moment right now and hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that age is not something to be ashamed of and that real beauty has nothing to do with a number. Drop a comment below and tell us what you think. Was Steve right to call Richard out that way? What would you have said? We read every single comment and we love hearing your thoughts. Until next time, remember that the people who love you through the years, through the gray hair and the laugh lines, and the long nights and the hard mornings, those are the people who deserve your respect, your gratitude, and your appreciation. Do not wait for someone else to tell you what you should have already known.